my parents' new home is haunted. I 20F have moved back into my parents' house after some personal issues. My parents live in North Carolina, an extremely haunted state. The house they moved into is 8 bedroom house with a basement. The only history I truly know is that a doctor lives here before we did, which is very chilling. Why need 8 bedrooms for one person? One thing about the house that I have noticed is that all the locks were on the outside of the doors. The reason I say were is BC. They were slide locks that were screwed into the door, and you can still see the holes in the door, but that's creepy in itself. Now for the ghosts, I've had plenty of stories from all my siblings. Shaden 17M. The basement has its own door that leads outside. You walk out the door and go up the stairs on your left. You pretty much walk down into the ground. This stairway has its own roof in a way that's at ground level. He was standing under it getting air when he heard 2 footsteps on top of it. When he went to look, nobody was there. Emery 15F. Our backyard has a shed that's on the other side of the yard. The shed has a motion sensor light which constantly goes off at night. She has heard things walking around the house, and the scary part about my brother's story is that her window is right above that platform that he heard the footsteps on. And finally me, Nevi 20F. I've heard full-on whispering in the middle of the night, heard something run up the stairs at me which spooked the cat, and now as I'm writing this I feel like I'm being watched. And some other stories are from my little brother. Adanija 10M has had horrifying dreams about his mom, my stepmom, sitting in the corner of his room looking at the ceiling and calling out his name. My stepmom 35F saw an apparition at the end of her bed, and the next night had a dream that a ghost came to her and told her it wasn't here to hurt us. I thought you guys would find some interest in this post. I'm pretty sure she wasn't talking to me. This happened years ago when I was working as a laundry aide and housekeeper in a nursing home when I was 19. It still unnerves me when I think about it. So, like I said, I worked in a nursing home. This one in particular had a lot of sickly patients, either extremely dependent old folk or dementia-ridden people. Each room had 2 beds, so they could have roomies or a couple could be together. If the family was really rich, they could have their own. Working there was unsettling enough between hearing loud weeping and meeting residents who were like shells. It was an extremely sickly facility, and I knew it wasn't their fault. But being young, I was easily unnerved. There was one lady in particular though, who always kinda scared me. I was 19, and this was my first job, so I was a very nervous person. She had a room to herself, with lots of things, but I never saw her have company. I tried to make small talk with her to be friendly the first few times I cleaned her room or delivered her clothes, but she always ignored me or glared at me, so I stopped trying. One day, I arrived to her room to clean and I hear her talking, like full sentences, a full conversation, pauses and all. When I step in, she glances at me long enough for me to give a quick smile before she looks away again, staring at the ceiling. I looked around, but there was no guest. I shrugged it off as a quirk and got to work. A few moments pass and I hear her talking again. I didn't understand her though, so I turned around politely and asked her, "Were you talking to me, miss?" She abruptly stopped and stared up at the ceiling, furious, and doesn't answer. I apologized softly and turned around to continue cleaning. Then she spoke again, and this time I understood her clearly. "Sorry about her." Pause. "No, I don't want you to kill her." I froze mid-wipe and felt chills go down my back. Surely I misheard her. She continued on, saying, "Because if you do, the nurses will be upset and everyone will make a big fuss, and I don't feel like dealing with that right now." I don't remember anything but fear. I finished as fast as I could and got the fuck out of there. I found my supervisor and recounted the story hysterically, on the verge of quitting. She didn't believe me, thinking I was trying to get out early, and told me to take a break early. I took the time to calm down, and from that day on, I didn't spend more than a couple minutes in her room when I had to clean it. Every time I did though, she would be talking to someone I couldn't see, and I didn't dare interrupt her. The night visitor. I used to live in this house through fourth grade to my high school graduation. For most of my younger life living there, I had a loft bed in my room. I also was lucky enough to be given the room with a walk-in closet since I had more clothing than my sister. This closet had a light switch on the outside and a lock on the inside of the door. At some point, if I remember correctly, I even put a lock on the wall so I could lock it from the outside. I'm not sure why now. Either way, I was very strict about sleeping with it closed every night. One night, I was sleeping on the loft bed and had been woken up on my back. I had always been a stomach sleeper, so this was already weird. I was compelled to sit up slightly and looked over the side of my bed to where the closet was. The door was wide open with the light on, and the inside was completely empty of any of my belongings. The only sign there was ever clothing in, there was a few pieces of clothing left on the ground in a path away from the closet. Like when you do laundry and try to carry all your clothes, but a piece would fall out on your way. While staring at my open closet, a dark shadow developed on the carpeted floor below the threshold of the closet. From that shadow, a dark mass grew from the ground at a steady but slow pace. As it rose, it developed more features, grooves and empty eye sockets, teeth, and a resemblance of a face. It rose until it stood just below the top of my closet door's height ended. It was a dark hooded figure with no body shape. Its robe simply connected with the ground and melted back into its shadow. Under the hood was a protruding bleached white deer skull with sharp teeth poking out in perfect symmetry. I stared at it blankly, feeling almost in a trace, unable to react or accurately process what was happening. After a few seconds of it existing in my space, it lifted its stare to face mine from on top of my loft bed. We held what eye contact we could with its empty black voids in place of eyes. Against my will, I slowly tilted my head down and nodded slowly to this figure. A second after my acknowledgement, it returned the nod and began to descend back into the shadow it had risen from. I watched as it slowly disappeared from existence until eventually the shadow didn't even exist anymore. Only then did I feel whatever force compelled me to sit up and move in the first place, let go, and I fell backwards onto my back and instantly was asleep again. I woke up the next morning to find my room completely normal, closet closed, light off, and full of my usual possessions. Yet I remembered that night's events and the feeling of it vividly. I still can now. Since that night, I've never experienced that same scenario or anything similar to it. Now I'll admit some things about myself. I have never walked in my life, not in my childhood and not in my adulthood. The most that happens is I talk and laugh in my sleep. I dream almost every night, and those dreams can be very vivid. I often wake up from them and have to take a second to realize I'm back in reality. However, I always know the difference between sleeping and being awake, and that night I swear I was awake. I felt myself move. I was sitting up and fell back on my bed. My eyes were open. I was being pulled by something and could feel it move me and release me. I try not to think about it too much. So, little boy in backseat. Several years ago, my friend girl and I were leaving our college class. Then we headed to the parking lot to leave. Her mother was picking her up and I was driving my car. She walked me to my car and I got in and cranked it up. Then she got into the front passenger seat of her mother's car. I saw her get in her car because I had pulled up behind her car in the parking lot, waiting to leave. As both of our cars headed to the exit, I very clearly saw a little boy sitting in the back seat of her car. He appeared to be 5 or 6 years old, and I could see the back of his head and side of his face as he moved around the back seat, as any energetic little kid would do. I didn't think much about it because I knew her mother babysat her nephews often. As I sat there watching the boy, waiting for them to pull out of the parking lot into the road, the only strange thought that I had was, for a split second, that something about the way the sun was shining on him in the back seat made me have a feeling that I still can't quite put my finger on. It was almost like for a second my brain knew that something was off, but at the time I had no reason to think anything was unusual, so I just dismissed the feeling totally and went on driving home. I thought nothing more about it because nothing was actually proven unusual. That is, until the next day. The next day after class, my sane friend and I were talking about an unrelated subject, and she happened to mention something about her nephews. So, remembering the previous day, I casually asked which nephew was in the car with her and her mother yesterday. She thought for a second and had a puzzled look on her face, then, without answering, she immediately called her mother from her cell phone and confirmed what she had thought. Her mother and her both agreed definitively. No child was with them on the previous day. I told them that I definitely saw a little boy in the back seat and asked again, were they sure no one was with them? They were sure no one was with them. I laughed it off and pretended that I was just kidding with them because I didn't want to freak them out. I told them I hadn't really seen anyone. They said nothing else about it, but I think they knew I was lying. But neither of us spoke about it again. I don't know how or why I saw the boy that wasn't there, but I'm sure I saw him there. It's still unexplainable, and I've never seen anything like that before, to my knowledge, but it creeps me out and makes me wonder why I saw him that day. Did my friend see my dead grandmother, or was she joking? Hello. This is my first post on here, so please bear with me. For context, my grandma passed away in July 2016. I was 10 or 11 and in 5th grade during this, and I was very close to her before she got sick. I already had a phone at this time for safety reasons, and my mom always made sure for me to call her once I got home safely. At my grandma and grandpa's house, there were also 3 other people living there, my 2 aunts and my cousin. At this time my cousin had graduated already, but wasn't in college yet, and her mom was always working. My other aunt wasn't working at that time either, so for most of the week, my aunt, cousin, and grandpa were home. Another important piece of information was my mom would always answer her phone, and if she didn't, she would call back in less than 5 minutes. It wasn't the first day of school. I think they didn't have a bus on the first few days of school or something like that. I just remember no one rode the bus for the first week or so. Also, Amia was a caring older sister to Holly, and she treated me like her sister too, so it's very hard to believe this was a prank. Now onto the actual story. I was in 5th grade. I had to be 10 or 11 years old, and my grandma had passed away in July 2016. We started school in August, so it was only a month after she had passed. Before 5th grade, I would always take the bus home, but the school made a new rule that only 2nd graders and lower could ride the bus. 3rd grade and above had to get picked up or walk home. To this day, we don't know why they made that rule. The weird thing about it is the school didn't warn any of the parents that this new rule would be enforced. So, I got on the bus only for the bus driver to tell me and my friends that we couldn't get on. So I called my mom and told her, and she called the school and explained that there was no warning beforehand and nobody could come pick me up till later. So the school made an exception, and they let us on the bus for that one day. I rode home with my 2 friends, and once we got off we talked for a few minutes. One of my friends was named Holly, and she had an older sister, Amia, in middle school that I was also friends with. My friend Jay was there too, but she got picked up as soon as we got off the bus, so I stayed with Holly and Amia. After a few minutes I headed home. It was hot that day. I live in Southern California, and it was during August. My grandpa already would have the door unlocked for me a few minutes before the bus arrived, so I can just come in, but that day it wasn't unlocked. So I knocked, and I waited about 2 minutes before calling him to open the door. I must have called him 4 times. Now I rule out that he was sleeping, because there's been several times recently where I call him while he's sleeping and he wakes up to answer his phone. I remember that he would always leave the gate on the side unlocked always, and through the backyard there a key for the back door. I tried opening it, but it was no use. It was locked. I remember thinking to myself how weird that was, but I didn't care. I remember feeling tired and hot. Then I called my mom, and she didn't answer. Then I called my sister, and she didn't answer. Then I called my aunt, my other aunt, my uncle, my cousin, and a family friend. None of them answered. I started to panic a little, but then I remembered one of the windows in the front was broken, and you could easily slide it open. So I slid it open and was going to hop inside. But unfortunately, I wasn't very athletic or small at that time, so I couldn't boost myself up. Even if I wanted to, I don't think I would be able to fit. So I went to my friend's house and asked Amia and Holly to come over. I told them I couldn't get in and if they have a bobby pin so I can try opening it. I was young and saw people opening locks with bobby pins all the time in movies, so I thought I could do it well. Then we all gave it a shot and unsurprisingly it didn't work. I then asked Amea if she could climb through the window and unlock the door for me, and she agreed. Me and Holly helped her up before she went in there. It took about 30 seconds to a minute before she unlocked the door for me. She looked pale and kind of surprised. I remember asking her what was wrong, and she said she saw a lady in the hallway. I remember telling her it was probably my aunt, but she said no, it was an older lady. I don't know why, but my first instinct was to ask her what the lady looked like. I started describing my grandma. Glasses, black curly hair, short and so on, and she said yes. Then I asked her if she saw her face, and she said no. I couldn't believe what she told me, and I just thanked her and went inside. I remember being scared, but not of what just happened. My thought was more of thinking there was a ghost in the home child mind, being scared of everything. But when I went through the hallway, I felt weirdly at peace, which was something so rare because I've always hated the hallway. Even to this day, whenever I'm at my grandpa's, I always have to turn the lights on. Was this a ghost or am I being silly? I'd like to preface this as well by saying that I grew up in a mobile home in the country Ohio, USA, and my closest neighbors were down the road and were my step family. I lived with my mom and stepdad, and I only saw my biological father every other weekend, and it was a 30-minute drive to where the drop-off pickup point was. Anyways, I was 10 and it was summer break. Our house had just had lunch. My stepdad was at work. My mom was annoyed with my brother and I for fighting over the TV. I wanted to watch cartoons, and he wanted to watch a movie and sent us to clean our rooms instead of argue over what to watch. Mind you, my brother's room was on one end of the mobile home and my room was right next to it, while our mom and stepdad's room was the room on the opposite end of the mobile home. And you always know whose footfall is whose when someone was walking through the house. I had a large toy chest that my stepdad made for me that looked up half of the small wall with the door to the hallway in my room at the time, and it sat in the corner. The edge of the chest was maybe 4 feet away from my bedroom door, and I'm sitting maybe a few feet away from both the chest and the door on the floor. I had gotten distracted while cleaning after I had found the Barbie I thought I had left at my bio dad's house, but was just in my own mess and started playing with it. I'd say maybe 15 minutes of me playing fashionista Barbie had gone by before I saw movement by my door out of the corner of my eye. I kid you not, I jumped. My first thought before truly looking at who was standing there was that my brother was messing with me since I didn't hear my mom's footfalls. She never hid her involuntary stomping, and he had to be mad we were sent to clean our rooms after fighting. I never heard anything, though I just saw a body slide into view in my periphery. But when I did look, it wasn't my brother, and I stopped breathing. I subconsciously knew that from the start of that moment, because my brother would have started yelling at me before he even left his room, if I'm being honest with myself. It was a man standing directly in front of my bedroom door, who looked like his clothing walked straight out of the late 80s, early 90s. But also looked in the face exactly like my biological father if he had had a mullet and a mustache. Logically, I knew it wasn't my actual father, since he lived an hour away and it wasn't his weekend. My bio dad also shaved his head religiously. That's not even the scary part though. The scary part is the fact that this man, who was nearly identical to my actual father in looks, was holding his decapitated head in his right hand like it was a lantern he was using to light up the room, pointing it right at me in broad daylight. His face stuck in a cruel smile, even though his head wasn't attached. I stared straight at him for maybe all of 10 seconds, my mouth gaping in shock, unable to scream or gasp, or even move the Barbie that was still in my hand. I finally squeezed my eyes shut as hard as I could and whispered to myself that he wasn't there, and when I opened my eyes again, he was gone. My mom came to check on us about 10 minutes after that had happened, and I was still staring at where he stood waiting for him to show back up. She asked if I was okay because I was entirely blank, but I brushed it off then. I never saw the man again, and I never brought it up to anyone until writing this post. Hands down, one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, and like I said, I literally think about this moment at least once a week. So do you think this was a ghost encounter from my childhood?